Well, hello, my friend. Welcome back to another episode of the From Chaos to Peace podcast, where I talk about how clutter is so much more than you think, and we put a spiritual twist on clearing that clutter to get organized. Thank you so much for allowing me back into your ears. Well, hello, my friend. I'm your host, Conny. Welcome to this episode. And almost welcome to 2025. It's just around the corner. If you listen to this episode when it comes out, we only have 2 days left in 2024. So 2025 will be a special year for me and for this podcast actually, as I'm preparing to celebrate the 5-year anniversary for this podcast on February 17th. I don't know yet what special episode I should release that day. Do you have any ideas? Let me know. Send me an email at conny@connygraph.com or DM me on Instagram, for example. My handle is I am Conny Graph. I really need some inspiration what I could do for this special episode. Anyways, today's episode is also special because it's the 5th episode about how to kickstart the new year in a positive way. There were variations over the years, and my framework is flexible enough and it evolves from year to year, but its heart and soul is always the love tour of the previous year. Looking back and celebrating success, learning from challenges, and then setting intentions from that clarity. Also, I still stand strong with my opinion that January 1st is not the best day to start something new. More about that later. Before we dive into this year's Kickstart episode, I want to say if you prefer to have today's content in writing, like the guide, how I do the love tour of 2024, you can find a link in the show notes to receive the Love Tour 2024 Kickstart guide directly in your inbox. You find the show notes at connygraph.com/podcast/246. That is connygraph, ConnyGraph.com/podcast/246. First, let's look at the variations of my Kickstart episodes over the last 5 years, or last 5 episodes, actually. So, the first one that I released this way was episode 56 for 2021. The main message was to give equal airtime to both the positive and negative in life, and about focusing on what we can control instead of what we cannot control. And still to this day, that is my mantra when I coach people. That's what I say a lot. Is this something you can control? I also introduced the concept of the Love Tour of 2020 the first time. It's a way to find gratitude and positivity even in challenging times and areas. And we all know what happened in 2020. So for some, it really wasn't an easy year and an easy task to find positives to be grateful for. Me sometimes included. The second episode around how to kickstart a new year was episode 106 for 2022. The main message was that winter's darkness and cold encourages rest and introspection, not rushing into new goals. I emphasize that it's okay if our body doesn't feel motivated or is not ready to start fresh. I talked about how to do a love tour of 2021 as a 2-part process. So slightly different than 2021. Then the third episode around kickstarting a new year was episode 156 for 2023. I continued talking about reflection rather than action. The main message here was to focus on releasing what we've been tolerating and reframing life lessons as blessings. You can make your own mind where that came from. And my love tour of 2022 was a 3-part process compared to the year before where it was just a 2-part process. And then the last episode I did about kickstarting a new year was episode 200, which was for this year, for 2024. And the main message was that without a clear plan, goals and intentions and resolutions remain wishful thinking, that we need to be realistic and that change takes time. When we're trying to do too much too quickly, that can lead to frustration. And my Love Tour of 2023 was again a 3-part process, but slightly different from the one the year before. And so here we are at the end of 2024 and the onset of 2025. And this year I still have the same framework of the 3-part Love Tour, but again with a slightly different approach. I'm about living a life of self-love. You may have heard me say clearing clutter is self-love. It has to do with self-care and making our lives not unnecessarily hard for ourselves, rather making it easier for ourselves, right? Easier and more effortless. So again, I still stand strong in my perhaps controversial opinion that while January 1st really has a powerful pull to make us want to take off and launch something new, believe me, I do feel it too. I think it's largely influenced by our socialization and the constant messages we hear everywhere in the media, in social media, in the news. What are your resolutions? Blah, blah, blah. I believe this drive to leap into action might not be aligned with where our bodies, hearts, and souls are during this time of the year. It's dark outside, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere. It might be different for you people on the Southern Hemisphere, but here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's dark outside. And for example, our ancestors spent this season indoors. They were planning, repairing, and preparing for the coming spring and not rushing to take action in the outside world. Instead, winter invites us to reflect, build systems, and create habits that will support us when the energy shifts and when we're truly ready to take action in the spring. And this year specifically, with Mars retrograde, Mars, who is the planet of action, being retrograde, this amplifies the invitation to pause and plan rather than forcing bold new starts, I would think. So don't fight windmills is my message this year. And listen to your body. Listen to your body and the surrounding energies instead of forcing change, because the calendar says it's January 1st. Nature's hibernation reminds us to rest and reflect, not to rush into new resolutions. January is ideal for letting go, reflecting on what no longer serves us, and preparing for the action that will come when the time is right. And my theory is that's also the reason why many set new goals, intentions, and resolutions for the new year, but then statistics shows that over 80% have abandoned them by February already. This fresh start effect of January 1st really provides initial motivation, but it cannot sustain us long term, as statistics show, as my own experience shows, and I might guess that you had a similar experience. So, permission to slow down. Here is my Love Tour for 2024. You can adopt it. You can tweak it as you wish. You can take it as inspiration. You cannot do anything with it. That's all up to you. But I feel like the tradition of looking back and seeing what worked, what didn't work, and what we want to do differently is really a healthy one. It just doesn't mean we have to take action right away, right? And also, I wanted to say I have a little bit of a reframe of success for this year. I came across this and I don't know where the heck I did read it. I must have read it in a book or in a blog post or heard it on a podcast. So I'm really not sure right now where I heard this. But was what I adopted for myself. It's a reframe of success. So instead of thinking of success just as the end goal, that is far away and really hard to imagine that we will even reach it or how to reach it or whatever, the author or whoever I heard it or read it from said to rethink it and instead thinking of it as useful. So, for example, success is for most of us very black and white. I'm either successful or I'm not. But thinking in terms of useful will activate a different area of our brain. It will allow us to gain traction, and traction leads to momentum, which motivates us to take more action. And with thinking in terms of useful, I mean more like when we go through the 3-part love tour of 2024 and we're talking about or thinking about what we could do differently in 2025, thinking of how these actions or things that we want to do differently could be useful. So you will know what I'm talking about when we go through it. So let's dive into the love tour for 2024. The first part is what worked well. So we want to reflect on the positive aspect of this past year. And the core questions here are really what worked well and what do I want more of. And it's really worth it to think about that, maybe going through your calendar, see what all happens, going through your memory, figuring out what all happened, and all the things that you consider successes or that worked well, to list those maybe on a piece of paper or in your journal or wherever. I often do that in Evernote, digitally, or in Apple Notes, wherever. I have also some additional prompts that I really like and that I collected over these last episodes that I talked about how to kickstart the new year well. So the additional prompts are: who's the most interesting person you've met last year? What new place did you discover last year? Which quote, movie, or book, I can't speak today, or book positively impacted you? What mental, emotional, or physical challenges did you overcome? And what can you do now that you couldn't do a year ago? So those are the additional prompts. So the exercise I suggest you do is list at least one positive thing for each month. So you just take the 12 months, January to December, and then you go through these 2 core questions: what worked well, what do I want more of, and the additional prompts that I just listed, and see whether you can find one thing for each month. And then you want to be grateful for what you created for yourself, right? Like, not in a, oh, you have to be grateful, but like really look at it and be grateful for what you created for yourself, what all worked well. When you're done with this part, we move on to part number 2, which is a bit more challenging because we're looking at what didn't work. We want to examine the areas that we'd like to change, that we need to release and leave behind, right? So the core questions here are: what didn't work and what do I want less of? The additional prompts are: what stressed me out or frustrated me? What was I tolerating that I don't want to? What was I tolerating that I no longer want to tolerate? What was a major life lesson here? Because even challenging experiences can hold hidden blessings in them, right? So maybe we don't see it yet, but we can recognize at least that it was a major life lesson. So the exercise is that we don't want to find one for every single month, right? Like, we want to find as little as possible, or we're hoping we're having as little as possible things that didn't work. So the only thing that we want to do is list the things that didn't work. And then we want to also ask ourselves, did we have control over this? or did we not? If we didn't have control over it, then it was a life lesson that we may get a blessing out of it. But if we did have or do have control over it, we can write down the pattern or habits that we like to leave behind so that we don't repeat this thing that didn't work, this action that didn't work, this project that didn't work, right? This is a hard part, like part number 2, what didn't work. We all don't want to really look at it. We don't want to reflect on it. But I learned, and I read somewhere, and I don't know whether it was Dr. Benjamin Hardy or whoever said it in one of their books, that science says that we're not learning by doing, we're learning by reflection. And this is why it's so important that we do part 2 and ask ourselves, what didn't work? And did we have control over it, that it didn't work? And if yes, then we need to let it go and just check life lesson learned. If we do have control over it, or we would have had control over it, then we want to extract the patterns and habits that we want to change so that we don't repeat this, right? Okay, let's move on. So part 3 is, what will you do differently in 2025? So we want to focus on what we need to learn, but then we don't want to dwell on it, right? So let's move on and figure out, dream, and visualize a little bit what we want to do differently. What we can ask ourselves, the core question is, what would I do differently in hindsight? How can I build on what worked and let go of what didn't? And here comes now the concept of useful. How can I make my physical, digital, social space more useful? What routines and systems could I implement that would be more useful to me, for my business, for my clients, for my family, for my social circle? Like I said, I can't speak today. For my social circle, for the world, like what I'm putting out there, what I'm radiating out there. What could I do that is more useful? I also want to encourage you to do a small exercise and look at the current themes that you found in the part 1 and part 2. In part 1, what you want more of, and part 2, what you want less of. Is there a common theme that you maybe can figure out? Just, I don't know. I don't know for you, but I find that an interesting exercise. I'm still pondering on my common theme. So this love tour, I hope, is for you a reflection and a renewal guide for a purposeful and peaceful 2025 for you and your business. Again, if this all felt a bit fast and you'd like to have it in writing, you can find the link in the show notes to receive the Love Tour 2024 Kickstart Guide directly into your inbox. You find the show notes at connygraf.com/podcast/246. I want to remind you that while patience, determination, and persistence are key, it's also important not to be too hard on yourself. Growth, whatever it is, keeping a decluttered home or office, keeping organized finances, being patient, whatever else, personal growth and self-development is a journey. And embracing self-love along the way helps us stay balanced and kind to ourselves. I had to learn this. I was one who would beat myself up extensively. And I learned that it's not helping me grow faster or better. On the contrary, self-love is hard to do sometimes because we are usually the hardest on ourselves, harder than on anybody else. But we can learn, we can try. You got this. one step at a time, or how I always say, in a few minutes a day, you keep the chaos away. So again, in summary, do this love tour of 2024. Figure out what worked well, what didn't work so well, and what you want to change for 2025. But don't feel like you have to jump in because it's January 1st and do all this. Change it and run to the gym and declutter everything and whatever else comes to your mind or is your goal. Allow yourself, allow your body, your heart, and your soul to still rest and reflect, to prepare or repair, and to plan for the new year, even though January 1st will come along and most people around you will do differently. But you will see where they are in February. So do you, okay? You got this. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for listening all the way to the end and for being a supporter of this podcast. Thank you. And I'm wishing you a joyful transition into 2025. A quiet one, a reflective one. Until next time, take good care and be safe.